Karen Blackwell's nostrils flared as she squinted through her binoculars. The Saturday afternoon sun beat down on her back porch as she surveyed the community pool from her strategic vantage point. Her jaw clenched when she spotted the Henderson children splashing in the shallow end. The youngest, a 4-year-old boy, had briefly pulled his swim trunks down to adjust them. "Gotcha," Karen whispered, fumbling for her phone while keeping the binoculars balanced on her nose. She snapped several photos, zooming in as far as her iPhone 15 Pro Max would allow. This was exactly the ammunition she needed. As the newly elected HOA president of Sunnyside Estates, Karen had promised to restore decency and order to their community. At 52, with her ash-blonde bob and perpetually pursed lips, Karen had spent 23 years in the neighborhood watching it deteriorate as younger families moved in. The Henderson family, with their 3 energetic children, weekend barbecues, and tendency to park their guests' cars along the street, represented everything wrong with the neighborhood's direction. Karen set down her binoculars and scrolled through the photos. Not quite clear enough, but certainly enough evidence. She pulled up the county sheriff's non-emergency line from her favorites and pressed call. "County Sheriff's Office, how may I direct your call?" "This is Karen Blackwell, HOA president of Sunnyside Estates." She spoke with practiced authority. "I need to report indecent exposure involving minors at our community pool." The dispatcher's voice shifted. "Ma'am, are you reporting that a child is being victimized?" "I'm reporting that the Henderson family is allowing their children to expose themselves at our community pool. It's a violation of both our HOA regulations and public decency laws." Karen's voice rose with righteous indignation. "I have photographic evidence." There was a pause on the line. "Ma'am, did you just say you have photographs of undressed minors?" Karen felt a flutter of unease but pushed forward. "I'm documenting a violation. Someone needs to address this immediately." 20 minutes later, Karen stood at the pool gate in her white capri pants and navy blazer despite the 90-degree heat. She watched with satisfaction as a sheriff's cruiser pulled into the parking lot. Deputy Willis, a stocky man with a weathered face who'd responded to several of Karen's previous complaints, stepped out with a weary expression. "Ms. Blackwell," he nodded. "Where are the Hendersons?" Karen gestured dramatically toward the pool. "Over there, letting their children run wild as usual." The Hendersons, Sarah and Michael, were packing up their pool toys, their children wrapped in towels, looking confused as the deputy approached. "I have the photos right here," Karen said loudly, holding up her phone. She noticed several other pool-goers staring. Good. It was about time someone set an example in this community. But Deputy Willis wasn't reaching for her phone. Instead, he was frowning deeply. "Ms. Blackwell, I need to speak with you privately," he said, his voice low and serious. "Right now." Karen followed Deputy Willis to his cruiser, her heels clicking confidently against the pavement. She thought he wanted to review her evidence away from the prying eyes of other residents. Perfect. It showed he was taking her complaint seriously. "I've been documenting all of the Hendersons' violations," Karen explained as she scrolled through her photo gallery. Last week, they had a gathering that went past noise curfew. The week before, their lawn was a 1/4 inch above regulation height. And today, "Ms. Blackwell," Deputy Willis interrupted, his expression grave. "Are you aware that photographing minors in a state of undress, even partial undress, could be considered production of exploitative imagery of children?" Karen's thumb froze mid-swipe. "Excuse me." Additionally, using long-range photography equipment to observe and record people in a recreational area where they have a reasonable expectation of privacy could constitute voyeurism under state law. The blood drained from Karen's face. "I was documenting a violation." "Ms. Blackwell, you've called the Sheriff's Department 17 times in the past 3 months. We've discussed your use of emergency services before." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a goldfish. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. She was protecting property values. She was maintaining standards. She was doing her duty. "I'm going to need your phone, ma'am," Deputy Willis said, extending his hand. "You can't be serious," Karen sputtered. "I'm the victim here. The Hendersons are deliberately flouting the rules to antagonize me." Deputy Willis sighed. "I've spoken with the Hendersons. Their 4-year-old momentarily adjusted his swimwear. This does not constitute indecent exposure." Karen's eyes narrowed. "So you're taking their side? Again?" From the corner of her eye, Karen could see Sarah Henderson watching from the pool gate, her youngest child on her hip. Other neighbors had gathered, including Vice President of the HOA, Gerald Thompson, who looked deeply uncomfortable. "This isn't about sides, Ms. Blackwell. This is about appropriate use of law enforcement resources and, frankly, appropriate behavior as a community member." Deputy Willis's voice remained calm but firm. "Now we can discuss this further at the station, or you can delete those photos right now, in front of me." Karen's chest tightened. This was humiliation. This was persecution. The deputy clearly had some personal vendetta against her. Perhaps he was friends with the Hendersons. Perhaps he was one of those officers who didn't respect authority figures like herself. With trembling fingers, Karen deleted the photos one by one as Deputy Willis watched. "I'll be filing a complaint about this treatment," she said through clenched teeth. "That's your right," he replied evenly. "Just as it's my duty to inform you that further harassment of your neighbors could result in more serious consequences." As Deputy Willis walked away, Karen became acutely aware of the hushed conversations around her. Her cheeks burned. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Monday morning found Karen seated at her dining room table, surrounded by printed copies of the HOA bylaws, a legal pad filled with notes, and her third cup of coffee. The weekend's humiliation had crystallized into a renewed sense of purpose. If Deputy Willis wouldn't enforce decency, she would have to take matters into her own hands. Her phone buzzed with a message from Gerald Thompson. "Emergency HOA board meeting called for 7 p.m. tonight. Your presence required." Karen frowned. She hadn't called any meeting. As president, only she had the authority to call emergency sessions. "Who authorized this meeting?" She typed back. Gerald's response was immediate. "Majority vote of the board. My house." This was mutiny. Karen's fingers tightened around her phone. After 2 years of clawing her way to the presidency, after countless hours spent patrolling the neighborhood for violations and meticulously documenting infractions, her position was being threatened. She spent the day preparing her defense, printing out violation notices she'd issued over the past 6 months. Proof of her dedication. The Hendersons alone had received 23 citations for their wind chimes, noise violation, their children's chalk drawings on the sidewalk, defacement of common areas, and the time they put their trash cans out at 5 p.m. instead of after 6 p.m. At precisely 6:55 p.m., Karen arrived at Gerald's house, a folder of documentation tucked under her arm. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a structured blazer and pencil skirt that projected authority. The conversation in Gerald's living room died as she entered. 5 board members sat in a semicircle, with an empty chair obviously left for her. To her horror, Michael Henderson sat in the corner, a non-board member who had no business being present. "What is he doing here?" Karen demanded, pointing at Michael. Gerald cleared his throat. "Michael has filed a formal complaint against you, Karen. As per bylaw 17.3, any resident who files a complaint has the right to attend the hearing." "Complaint? What complaint?" Karen remained standing, refusing to take the offered seat. "Harassment," Michael said quietly, "and misuse of HOA authority." Karen laughed sharply. "This is ridiculous. I've been enforcing the rules that everyone agreed to when they moved here. Rules that protect our property values and community standards." Gerald nodded to Diane Miller, the board secretary, who slid a document across the coffee table toward Karen. "This is a petition signed by 37 residents," Gerald explained. "They're requesting a vote of no confidence in your leadership." Karen's stomach dropped. 37 signatures. That was nearly half the neighborhood. "On what grounds?" she asked, her voice higher than she intended. "Creating a hostile living environment, selective enforcement of bylaws, and most recently, inappropriate conduct involving minor children," Diane read from her notes. That's slander," Karen spluttered. "I was reporting a violation." Karen and Gerald said gently, "You were photographing children at the pool with binoculars." Multiple residents witnessed this, and Deputy Willis filed a report. The room spun slightly. Karen gripped the back of the chair. "I have documentation of every violation I've reported. Every single one is legitimate." Michael Henderson spoke up. "My family has received 23 citations from you in 4 months. Our next-door neighbors, the Paddles, 21. The Johnsons on the other side, 19. But the Millers, who've had peel and paint on their shutters since last fall, 0 citations. The Millers are fixing it gradually," Karen said defensively. "They're on a fixed income." "And my elderly mother who lives with us has mobility issues," Michael replied. "But that didn't stop you from citing us when her medical equipment was visible from the street." Karen felt the situation slipping from her control. This was more than a challenge to her authority. This was an orchestrated takedown. "I move for an immediate vote," said board member Frank Wilson, who had remained silent until now. Karen saw the determination in their eyes. This wasn't a hearing. It was an execution. All in favor of removing Karen Blackwell from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. 4 hands shot up without hesitation. Only Marjorie Peters, Karen's longtime ally on the board, kept her hand down, though she wouldn't meet Karen's gaze. "The motion passes," Gerald announced. "Karen, as per the bylaws, you'll remain on the board as a regular member until the next election, but your presidential authorities are revoked." Karen stood frozen, her folder of meticulously documented violations clutched to her chest. 20 years of neighborhood vigilance, of maintaining standards, of protecting property values, all undone because of these new families who didn't understand what made Sunnyside Estates special. "This is a mistake," she finally managed, her voice brittle. "You'll see. Without proper oversight, this neighborhood will deteriorate. Property values will plummet, criminal elements will move in. I was the only one willing to make the hard calls." Marjorie Peters finally spoke up. "Karen, we appreciate your dedication, but things have gone too far. A sheriff has been here 3 times this month alone. Because people were breaking the rules. Because you called them about children's birthday parties and lawn ornaments," Frank countered. "We're a community, not a prison camp." Karen gathered her belongings with shaking hands. "I've given everything to this neighborhood. Everything." "That's the problem," Michael Henderson said quietly. "You've given so much that you've forgotten we're just people trying to live our lives. My kids are afraid to play in our yard because they think you're watching them from your window, and you probably are." The accusation stung because it was true. Karen did watch. She patrolled. She documented. It was her contribution to maintaining the perfect community she'd moved into 23 years ago, when her now ex-husband had been alive and their future had seemed perfect. She walked out of Gerald's house without another word, her heels sinking slightly into the freshly watered lawn, a water restriction violation she'd normally document. The evening air felt thick with humidity and humiliation as neighbors watched from porches and windows. At home, Karen poured herself a generous glass of Pinot Grigio and sank onto her immaculate white sofa. Her house was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. No children's laughter. No family dinner conversations. No weekend guests parking inappropriately on the street. The silence she'd always treasured now felt oppressive. Her phone buzzed with a neighborhood watch app notification. Someone was reporting suspicious activity. A teenager on a skateboard after 8 p.m. Karen had set up the app 2 years ago to increase neighborhood vigilance. Now it seemed to mock her. She switched off her phone and found herself staring at the framed photo on her mantel, her ex-husband Richard with his arm around her, standing in front of their house on moving day 23 years ago. They'd been so proud, so certain they'd found the perfect place to build their life together. The door to the second bedroom, the one they painted yellow for the children they never ended up having, remained closed as it had for 15 years since Richard left. It struck Karen suddenly that in all her years of documenting violations, of fighting for the neighborhood's standards, she'd never actually made a single friend within the community. She knew everyone's names, vehicles, and schedules. She kept meticulous notes on their infractions, but she couldn't recall the last time she'd been invited to a neighborhood gathering, except in her official capacity. The realization settled heavily on her chest. She'd been so focused on preserving what Sunnyside Estates represented that she missed what it was supposed to be, a home. For 3 days, Karen didn't leave her house. She kept the blinds drawn and ignored the neighborhood watch app notifications that continued to ping her phone. Each alert felt like a reminder of her fall from power. She obsessively checked her email for messages from the board. Surely they'd realize their mistake and reinstate her, but found only promotional emails and bill reminders. On the 4th morning, Karen woke to the sound of laughter. She parted her bedroom blinds to see children riding bikes along the sidewalk, directly past the no bicycle riding on community sidewalks sign she'd had installed last summer. Their parents chatted in a dry way, coffee mugs in hand, making no effort to enforce the rule. The sight would normally send her reaching for her citation pad. Today, it just made her feel hollow. Her doorbell rang, startling her. Karen hadn't had a visitor in. She struggled to remember how long. She quickly dressed and checked her appearance. Despite everything, standards had to be maintained. Through the peephole, she saw Marjorie Peters holding a casserole dish. Karen hesitated before opening the door. "Marjorie." "Karen," Marjorie responded, holding out the dish. "Chicken divin. I thought you might like some home cooking." Karen accepted the dish awkwardly. "Thank you, but this isn't necessary. I'm perfectly fine." Marjorie's expression was skeptical. "May I come in?" Just for a moment. Karen reluctantly stepped aside. Marjorie had been her most reliable ally on the board, always voting with her on stricter enforcement measures. At 72, Marjorie had lived in Sunnyside even longer than Karen. "I noticed the Wilsons have put up unauthorized solar lights along their walkway," Karen said, desperate to establish some normalcy as they sat in her pristine living room. "And the Rodriguez family's new mailbox doesn't match the approved design aesthetic." Marjorie sighed. "That's actually why I wanted to talk about deer. I've been doing some thinking since the meeting." "About reinstating me?" "I have several precedents from other HOAs where improper procedure." "No, Karen." Marjorie's voice was gentle but firm. "About why I supported you all these years, and why I was wrong to do so." Karen's back stiffened. "Wrong? We've been protecting this neighborhood." "Have we?" Marjorie asked, glancing around the immaculate but sterile living room. Or have we been punishing people for living their lives in ways that remind us of what we don't have? I don't know what you're talking about, Karen said sharply. When my Harold died 12 years ago, I threw myself into HOA business, Marjorie explained. It gave me something to focus on besides my grief. And I found myself getting angrier every time I saw families enjoying what I'd lost: backyard barbecues, children's birthday parties, holiday gatherings. Karen shifted uncomfortably. This isn't about emotions. It's about maintaining standards. Is it? Marjorie leaned forward. Then why do you issue more citations to families with children than to anyone else? Why does it bother you so much when the Hendersons have friends over? Because they break the rules, Karen insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Karen, I've watched you since Richard left. You've built a fortress of rules to protect yourself, but you've locked yourself inside it. Marjorie's eyes were kind but sad. I did the same thing until my granddaughter was born. She helped me see that I was using the HOA to punish others for having what I'd lost. Karen felt exposed, as if Marjorie had peeled back her carefully constructed exterior and seen the loneliness beneath. The rules exist for a reason. Yes, but communities exist for a better reason. Marjorie stood up. Think about it, dear. And when you're ready, the neighborhood book club meets at my house on Thursdays. No citations issued for parking violations on book club nights. After Marjorie left, Karen sat with the untouched casserole, her mind churning. She always dismissed the friendlier vision of Sunnyside that younger residents advocated for. In her mind, a good neighborhood was an orderly one, where property values increased and standards were maintained. But sitting alone in her perfect, quiet house, Karen had to confront a question she'd been avoiding. What good was a perfect neighborhood if you experienced it in isolation? 1 week after her removal as president, Karen found herself doing something she'd never done before, watching the neighborhood without her citation pad. From a bench at the community park, installed last year over her strenuous objections about maintenance costs, she observed Sunnyside estates with fresh eyes. The Rodriguez children were helping their father plant flowers along their front walkway, technically a violation of the approved landscaping plants list Karen had implemented. The Paddles had set up a small basketball hoop in their driveway, another violation she would have documented. The Henderson family walked their golden retriever, stopping to chat with neighbors along the way. Karen watched as Sarah Henderson paused to help Mrs. Collins, an elderly resident, carried her groceries inside. The simple act of kindness made Karen's throat tighten unexpectedly. When had she last offered help to a neighbor instead of criticism? Karen's solitary observation was interrupted when a soccer ball rolled to a stop at her feet. A young girl, one of the Wilson children, Karen thought, though she realized she didn't know the child's name despite having cited her family numerous times, approached cautiously. "Can I have my ball back, please?" a girl asked, keeping a safe distance. Karen picked up the ball. "You're playing in the common area. There's a no-ball game sign right there." The words came automatically, her default response to any rule violation. The little girl's face fell. "I'm sorry. Dad said it was okay because there's nobody else using the park right now." Karen glanced around. The park was indeed empty except for them. The no-ball games rule had been instituted years ago after Mrs. Abernathy complained about noise. Mrs. Abernathy, who had moved away 3 years ago. "What's your name?" Karen asked, still holding the ball. "Emma. Emma Wilson." The girl looked nervously toward her father, who was walking over with a concerned expression. "Emma," Karen repeated, testing the name. Not the Wilson child or the resident at 42 Sunnyside Lane, but Emma, a little girl who wanted to play in an empty park on a beautiful day. Karen made a decision that surprised even herself. She held out the ball. "Here you go, Emma. The sign does say, no ball games," but she took a breath. Perhaps that rule needs reconsideration. Emma's face brightened as she took the ball. "Really? Thanks, Miss Blackwell." The fact that the child knew her name without introduction spoke volumes about Karen's reputation in the neighborhood. Mr. Wilson approached, clearly bracing for confrontation. "Emma, I told you be careful with the ball." "It's fine," Karen said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "The park should be for playing." Wilson's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Oh, thank you." As Emma ran back to continue her game, Wilson lingered awkwardly. "I heard about the HOA meeting. For what it's worth, I think they were too harsh." Karen blinked in surprise. "You do?" "You've been dedicated to the neighborhood, even if I haven't always agreed with your methods." He hesitated. "The community cleanup day you organized last fall was actually really successful. My kids still talk about how you showed them how to properly sort recyclables." Karen had forgotten about that day. She'd been so focused on ensuring proper procedures were followed that she'd missed the positive interactions. "I thank you," she managed, unused to receiving compliments from neighbors. As Wilson returned to his daughter, Karen remained on the bench watching the neighborhood with new awareness. For years, she documented every flaw, every violation, every departure from the ideal community she envisioned. But she'd missed the community that actually existed right in front of her, imperfect, evolving, but in many ways more vibrant than the sterile perfection she'd been enforcing. The realization was uncomfortable, like trying on clothes that didn't quite fit. But for the first time in years, Karen felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the rigid framework that had dictated her interactions with Sunnyside Estates. 2 weeks later, Karen sat stiffly in a metal folding chair at the back of the community center. The monthly giveaway meeting was about to begin. The first one in 5 years she wouldn't be leading. Gerald Thompson stood at the podium now, shuffling papers and adjusting the microphone. Karen had debated not attending at all. Her pride still smarted from the humiliation of her removal, but curiosity had won out. Besides, she was still technically a board member, even if stripped of her presidential powers. "Before we begin with regular business," Gerald announced, "we have a community issue to discuss. As many of you know, the city has approved rezoning for the vacant lot at the corner of Sunnyside and Maple to allow for commercial development." Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen sat up straighter. This was the first she'd heard of any rezoning. "A developer has proposed building a 24-hour convenience store," Gerald continued. "While this would provide certain amenities, there are concerns about increased traffic, lighting, and potential security issues given the 24-hour operation." Karen's mind raced. A convenience store would indeed bring unwanted elements to their residential enclave. Property values would certainly be affected. This was exactly the kind of threat she'd always warned about. "The board will be forming a committee to engage with city planning on this issue," Gerald explained. "We need volunteers who can research similar developments in other neighborhoods, prepare a community impact assessment, and represent Sunnyside at city council meetings." Hands shot up around the room, but Karen remained still, mentally cataloging all the regulations and precedents that could be useful. This was precisely her area of expertise, fighting to preserve the neighborhood's character against external threats. After the meeting, Karen found herself lingering near the refreshment table, rehearsing what she might say to Gerald. She needed to be on that committee. Whatever her personal failings might have been, her knowledge of zoning laws and community regulations was unmatched. "Karen." Michael Henderson approached, a cup of coffee in hand. Karen tensed, expecting confrontation, but his expression was neutral. "I thought your input during the budget discussion was spot on. That drainage issue on Elmwood has been ignored too long." Karen blinked in surprise. She made only one comment during the meeting, pointing out that the recurring flooding on Elmwood Street needed addressing before cosmetic improvements to the playground. "It's simple prioritization," she said carefully. "Infrastructure before aesthetics." Michael nodded. "Exactly. That's why I think you should join the rezoning committee." Karen couldn't hide her surprise. "You want me on the committee? After everything that happened?" "Look," Michael said frankly, "we have our differences about what makes a good neighbor. But nobody knows zoning laws like you do, and nobody will fight harder to protect this community from outside threats." The acknowledgement of her expertise soothed something in Karen. The developer will use the promise of convenience and tax revenue to push this through. They always do. "Which is why we need someone who can speak their language but represent our interests." Michael hesitated. "The committee meets at my house tomorrow night. Sarah's making her lasagna." Karen struggled with conflicting emotions. Working with the Hendersons felt like admitting defeat, and yet here was an opportunity to use her knowledge for something the entire community actually wanted: protection from external threats rather than internal policing. "I'll bring the property value impact studies from the Westfield development," she found herself saying, "and the traffic assessment templates." Michael smiled, the first genuine smile he'd ever directed at her. "Perfect. See you at 7. As Karen drove home, she realized she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: valued for her contributions rather than feared for her enforcement. It was a subtle but profound difference. That night, Karen pulled out her extensive files on zoning regulations and commercial development impacts. For years, she used her research skills to find new rules to enforce. Now she was using the same skills to protect the community in a way everyone could support. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent years believing she was Sunnyside's greatest defender, only to become viewed as its greatest nuisance. Now she had a chance to be a genuine advocate, not by policing her neighbors, but by standing with them against a common concern. 6 months later, Karen stood at the podium in the community center, pointer in hand, as she guided her neighbors through a detailed presentation. Behind her, a projector displayed traffic flow diagrams, property value assessments, and environmental impact studies. "In conclusion," she said, indicating the final slide, "the modified proposal we've negotiated with the developer addresses all our major concerns. Operating hours restricted to 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., enhanced landscaping buffers, reduced signage illumination, and a written agreement for security monitoring. Applause broke out among the assembled residents. In the front row, Gerald Thompson and the rest of the HOA board nodded approvingly. Michael Henderson gave her a thumbs up. The city council votes next Tuesday, Karen continued once the applause died down. I have confirmation that our petition with 156 signatures has been received and will be entered into the record. After the meeting, residents gathered around Karen asking questions and offering thanks. It was a novel experience being approached with gratitude rather than apprehension. She found herself engaged in conversations that had nothing to do with rule violations, discussions about garden varieties with Mrs. Patel, book recommendations with Frank Wilson, and an invitation to Emma Wilson's soccer game that weekend. As the crowd thinned, Marjorie Peters approached with a knowing smile. I told you there was a place for you in this community beyond being its enforcer. Karen allowed herself a small smile in return. I still believe in rules, Marjorie, just with more flexibility on the application. That's called wisdom, dear. Marjorie patted her arm. Are you coming to book club tomorrow? We're discussing that mystery novel I lent you. I'll be there, Karen promised. She'd been attending for 3 months now, initially sitting silently in the corner, but gradually joining the discussions. Last week, she even laughed out loud at one of Sarah Henderson's jokes, a sound so unfamiliar that she clapped her hand over her mouth in surprise. As Karen packed up her presentation materials, she spotted Deputy Willis entering the community center. Their eyes met, and after a moment's hesitation, he walked over. Ms. Blackwell, he nodded. Impressive presentation. Deputy, she acknowledged. Just doing my part. I heard about your work on this committee, he said. The sheriff mentioned your name came up at the City Planning Commission. Apparently you asked some questions no one else thought to ask about the traffic safety assessment. Karen adjusted her glasses. I simply pointed out the statistical inconsistencies in their projections. Deputy Willis smiled slightly. Well, it made an impression. The commission is looking for civilian members with analytical skills. The sheriff suggested your name if you're interested. The irony didn't escape Karen. The same law enforcement official who had once threatened to take her to the station was now recommending her for a civic position. I'll consider it, she said cautiously. As Deputy Willis walked away, Karen found herself alone in the community center. Through the windows, she could see her neighbors in small clusters in the parking lot, still chatting. Gerald was laughing at something Michael had said. Emma Wilson was showing Mrs. Patel a new trick with her soccer ball. Karen thought about the convenience store battle. She used every skill in her arsenal. Her research abilities, her knowledge of regulations, her attention to detail, but this time in service of bringing people together rather than enforcing separation. The rules had been tools, not weapons. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sarah Henderson. Committee celebration dinner at our place Sunday. The kids are asking if you'll bring that chocolate cake again. Karen stared at the message, remembering how she'd once photographed those same children from her deck, looking for violations to report. Now she was baking them cake and attending their soccer games. She typed back, I'll be there. Need me to bring anything else? As she walked to her car, Karen noticed a basketball hoop installed in the Thompsons' driveway, a clear violation of the no permanent sports equipment visible from the street rule she instituted 3 years ago. 6 months ago, she would have immediately documented it and issued a citation. Today, she simply noted that they positioned it to minimize visibility from the street while still being usable, a reasonable compromise. Karen Blackwell still believed in rules. She still valued order and standards. But she was learning that a community was more than its regulations. It was the people who lived within them, the relationships they built, and their shared investment in each other's well-being. As she pulled into her driveway, Karen noticed her next-door neighbor struggling with an oversized package. Without hesitation, she walked over to help, making a mental note to follow up on Marjorie's suggestion about updating the delivery guidelines to accommodate the increase in online shopping.